Welcome to Incredible Teams, the show that explores the world's best teams, the tactics that got them there, and how you can use some of them to apply to your own. This is your host, Liam Hurd, and today we have a special episode. It's our third and final episode covering the UCLA Bruins, the dynasty that won 10 national championships. And today is an interview with a player, Andy Hill, who played on those teams. He is the only player to play with both Kareem, Abdul-Jabbar, and Bill Walton, which is incredible. He's also one of only 14 players to win 3 national championships in men's college basketball. After his playing career, he went on to have a very successful career working as the president of CBS Productions, and he led the development and oversaw the production of shows like Touched by an Angel, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, Walker, Texas Ranger, and Rescue 911, among others. So very successful there as well. After that, he went on to write a book with Coach Wooden called Be Quick But Don't Hurry. So I definitely recommend you check that out. He was also the first known proponent to publish an article about the plus-minus statistic that is very prevalent in basketball, especially the NBA today, and that was in 1977. So very well-rounded, amazing to talk to, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Good. Yeah, I thought we'd start in a bit of a weird place, not with basketball, but with baseball. From the research, I saw that Coach, he played in college and that he always had a big love for the game. But what was your relationship to the game of baseball?
Well, growing up, I love baseball and basketball were sort of co-equal loves. It's hard to pick between the two, but something came along that sort of decided that for me when I was 13. And, when you're 13, things are starting to happen, right? You're starting to kind of see the world differently. And when I was 13, UCLA went on their first undefeated national championship run. So I kind of caught the wave at the perfect time, and baseball was left in my rearview mirror. I loved it. My grandson plays. I love going to the games, but something about the action of basketball, the constant motion, as opposed to the standing around, that is a lot of what you do playing baseball. So once that UCLA team in 63, 64 with Walton, Gale, and nobody taller than 6'5", I was hooked like a fish.
And then for those that maybe don't really know your background, could you just give a little background on maybe your childhood? Obviously, baseball was a big passion. Where you grow up, you grew up a couple of miles away from UCLA, and sort of your story of how you end up playing for Coach.
Well, I grew up in West LA, typical little middle-class kid riding his bike and playing with no parents around, no cell phone. They didn't know where I was, and I didn't have a helmet riding my bike. Somehow I survived. Used to go up in the hills above UCLA and ride my bike and chase rabbits. Now it's all dormitories. And, so really had kind of a very idyllic childhood. I do feel very much like that Paul Simon song, Born at the Right Time. Very fortunate, to grow up and be able to be off on my own. And as you noted, I fell in love with basketball. So a lot of my teenage years were just defined by just being in the gym and playing. I just loved it. And the truth of it is that I do think that players today have a big hole in their game because they spend a tremendous amount of time with trainers dribbling between cones. We spent all our time playing 3-on-3 basketball, and it teaches you spacing and movement. When a guy leaves his feet and needs to pass the ball, finding that opening for him is something that becomes second nature. But if you never play 3-on-3 where the court's wide open and you really can go where you want, you never develop those instincts. And I think that a lot of people who watch basketball today, and these players are so skilled, Liam, they're so much more skilled than they ever were. Any of these old timers who kind of grind on that are kidding themselves. These players are unbelievable, but they do lack a certain amount of court sense that the old fellas had.
And I guess you did talk about, I mean, baseball, basketball. A lot of the best athletes in the world, they weren't specialized on, one sport. They, dabbled in a few, and some of them were world class at two sports before they, had to choose. I think that's another piece that's maybe missing now with the, thousands and tens of thousands of dollars these kids are and the time they're pouring into just one sport and being so specialized. And there is something to say about being a bit more general. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, what I just went to a game to see Wemby.
Yeah.
And once again, the international players are about a third of the NBA now.
Right.
And I believe, and before the game, he was at midcourt with a couple of his teammates kicking the ball around like it was a soccer ball. And the truth of it is that European players grow up, and they all grow up also playing what they call football, what we call soccer. And it hooks up their brain. If you do an activity a lot, your brain hooks up differently. And so when you sit there and say, wow, what terrific footwork. Yes, their feet are hooked up. In fact, the truth of it is, I wish they'd get rid of that rule that you can't kick the ball. To me, the international players could actually be effective kicking the ball. They're very accurate with it. I don't understand why, they're not going to try and kick it in the stands. They'll kick it to a teammate. Heck, Luka could probably kick it in the basket. I don't know. But, it is a different sense of a rounded athlete. And I think that, it really does benefit young athletes to not specialize so early. But I know the pressure now is to, specialize early, get a coach early, get a trainer early. And I was very lucky. I got to grow up. I'd be a kid. I went to a big public high school, 3,500 youngsters, University High School, just a couple of miles from UCLA. Had a wonderful public school education. But, when John Wooden came calling and said, Andy, we'd like you to come to UCLA, I was like, are you kidding me? I don't think I heard any of the other dozens of schools. It was like, come on, the prettiest girl in town wanted to go to the prom with me. I'm going.
Yeah, and I was going to touch on high school next. Could you tell me a little bit about, tell me if I pronounce this wrong, Courtney Borio?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about Coach Borio, and how was he similar to Wooden? How was he a little different, and what's that link there?
He was stunningly similar. He played for Coach Wooden.
Right.
I actually only played for Coach Wooden. I played for Courtney Borio. When I was a freshman, I played for Gary Cunningham, who played for Coach Wooden. And then I played for 3 years, or sat on the bench for 3 years for Coach Wooden. So the similarities were stunning. I think part of what I understood over time, Liam, and we'll get to this a little bit later on, this idea of leadership and how one leads. Coach's philosophy of leadership is something that anyone can adapt. And when you adapt, it looks like your own. It doesn't look like, oh, wow, you're just copying John Wooden. I didn't realize the extent to which my high school coach, from a teaching perspective, we ran a different offense, we played some different defense, but it was the same basic learning structure, repetition structure, simplicity structure, and the way that he spoke to us. This was actually kind of funny. Coach Wooden is very famous for cussing us out by saying, goodness gracious sakes a lot, which I guess in Indiana is a cuss out. Maybe not where you come from, Liam, but where I come from, we thought it was kind of funny, but it was a cuss out. Well, my high school coach, Courtney Borio, he used to cuss us out too. How would he cuss us out? He was a mild-mannered fellow, like Coach, but competitive and could get really mad. And when he would blow his stack, he'd say, Liam, what the Sam Hill are you doing? Now, by the way, you're getting cussed out, right?
Right.
But you don't know who Sam Hill is, and you think it's kind of funny. I thought maybe it was a relative. I don't know. So anyhow, but we didn't know who Sam Hill was. Now, once again, dating myself, 1967, 1968, there was no internet.
No.
So we just thought, well, okay, it's a cuss out. I don't know. But about a year ago, I had a particular friend who coaches who I wanted to kind of convince not to use so much profanity. And so I thought I'll go and look up Sam Hill. Who is he that I kept getting sworn at with? Sam Hill was the most profane man of his day. So when I say, what the Sam Hill, I'm MFing you.
Yeah.
No HR department in the world is going to have a problem with what the Sam Hill. You MF somebody, pack your bags, and go home. So the truth of it is, it isn't that Coach was so mild-mannered, but he did understand that, when you get really mad, and at times as a leader, you have to get mad. Part of your job to get mad, to get people's attention, keeping people's attention over time, getting people to work together towards a common goal over time. These are not natural things. These are things you have to ingrain in everyone. Getting mad is part of the process. But there is no instructional value in MFing somebody. In fact, the truth of it is that when you're mad enough to do that, it's probably because that person just made a really critical mistake, right? Well, isn't that the time as a teacher, you need them to be listening very, very carefully. This is important. But when you start MFing somebody at a high volume, well, what we do naturally is we, metaphorically, we cover our ears. We can't listen to this.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's just Coach's whole perspective was around being a teacher. His whole vision of coaching grew out of this idea of being a teacher. And, there was simply no question, Liam, that when we went to UCLA, the vibe, the concept was he was there to help us. We weren't there to help him. And I think for many, many leaders, that's how they view the people under them. You guys are going to get me where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
John Wooden, he was there to get you where you wanted to go. And then, by the way, he wanted you to think you got there on your own.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Well, maybe another time that he probably wanted to curse you out, maybe using some stronger words than what he usually used, is perhaps when you wrote a letter to President Nixon.
Yeah, it was a heck of a letter too, by the way, Liam.
From what I read, I can see that.
I'll send it to you.
All right, yeah, please do. From reading and doing the research, it looks like you were probably one of the key drivers behind that letter. Can you tell me about that story?
Well, it was during the Vietnam War. Obviously, this was a period of time when our college campuses were on fire. We now have a volunteer army, so the college campuses have been pacified. I'm not trying to say that we were heroes. We were scared to death. But the truth of it is, we were involved in a very questionable war. Interesting now how many people agree with that sentiment that it was a very questionable war. But at the time, it was as divided politically as it is today. And, as young people on campus, the administration at that time featured a particularly odious fellow by the name of Spiro Agnew, who went to jail for fraud, but who was very dismissive of what he called the effete snobs who were marching against the war. And it seemed pretty clear to me that we were about as far from effete snobs as you could get. We were black kids and white kids and rich kids and poor kids and kids from all over the United States, and we were the national darn champions at a team sport. Don't tell me we're effete snobs and we're against the war. And we did have an alumnus who told me that he could get our letter to someone who had gone to UCLA who was close to the president. And when he told me that, I had never heard the name H.R. Bob Haldeman, who, if you're any fan of the Watergate hearings, you know all too much about. But so we wrote this letter, addressed it to Bob, Richard Nixon in care of Bob Haldeman. And one of the fellas on the team who signed the letter, not a friend today, I must say, took it to Coach. And, Coach took one look at the letter and, well, he sort of said, Andy, it looks like you wrote this thing. And I couldn't much say I didn't. I mean, we spent it was an interesting day getting everybody to agree to sign the letter. We were in the living room of Steve Patterson, our center's, where he was staying, and everybody was in the room, and we had a dictionary out. We were going through terms like imperialistic and genocidal, and people were like, "Whoa, hold on!" And I'm saying, "Okay, let's read what it says, and now you tell me if that's what it is." And yeah, I consider that letter actually one of the highlights of my UCLA career.
Very strongly worded, and maybe it didn't do much, but it was important for you and for the team to kind of set their stance.
Yeah.
And it probably helped maybe even coach maybe mellow a little, like later in later years dealing with Walton after you left and knowing that he couldn't be so controlling over your personal aspects of your lives.
Well, I think also, to be fair, Liam, the public perception of that war, there were people who wanted to line up anti-war press protesters like me and shoot us, who now will tell you the war was a mistake. So, you guys need to explain yourself to me, but what I know is the war was a mistake. To be silent would be a bigger mistake.
True. Now, we're going to come back to UCLA, obviously, but I haven't heard you talk about this before. So I was curious about your time playing in Israel for Maccabi Ramat Gan.
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell me a little about that?
Well, it was fascinating. I actually thought in some ways I might even move to Israel at that point in my life. It was 1972, 1970, and it was unfortunately the basketball industry at that point in Israel was run by some pretty sketchy characters, and they reneged on my contract and were quite stunned when I said, look, guys, it's okay. I don't need to be here. We had an agreement. You can either honor the agreement or I'll go home. And honestly, what do you mean you go home? You got the greatest gig in the world over here. Beautiful girls, sandy beaches, one game a week, hot. And they didn't take me seriously, actually. And of course, I left. I stayed for half a season. I had a good time, but I don't. I kind of feel like, people need to understand you can't make a good deal with a bad person. It doesn't exist.
Sound advice. All right. So you got back from Israel and you didn't go into your main body of work, your main profession immediately. You started coaching for a few years.
Right.
How did you sort of figure out that coaching maybe wasn't for you after all?
Oh, what an interesting question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. And it happened in a very dramatic fashion, very near where I live today. The coaching fraternity, it's all about who you know and who talks to who and who recommends who. And my good friend, Gary Cunningham, was the head coach at UCLA. And he'd been through his first year. And, I kind of needed to sit down with Gary and say, Gary, I need help. Anybody out there who's looking for an assistant? I've been here at Santa Monica College for a few years and, I don't really like the fella I'm working with. He has a very different philosophy. He's kind of a Bobby Knight dude, and I wasn't. And we met at a freeway, a hotel right off the freeway here in LA, right off of Sunset Boulevard. It's a round hotel, if you know LA at all. And I'll never forget, because we went to the top floor where the restaurant was, and I was already seated. Gary came in. Gary is a very, very understated man. And he came in wearing sunglasses, which kind of surprised me, and asked to switch tables so we could kind of sit out of the way. So, wow, no kidding. And I don't think I've ever told anybody this, but, Gary sat down to lunch. He started to cry. He said, Andy, you're a bright, talented guy. Do something else. I want him to explain something. Coaches weren't being paid anything then, right? People now go, oh, wow, these college coaches make $3-4 million. No, these guys were, John Wooden's biggest salary was $32,500 a year.
Right.
A lot of these guys had summer jobs. When Coach was first at UCLA in the summertime, he drove a milk truck.
Yeah, I thought so.
So, it was a very different environment, and Gary really encouraged me to get out of it. And I'm very grateful to him.
Yeah. Good friend right there.
Yes.
So perhaps one of your most famous stories is standing over a shot with a 2-iron in hand. Maybe you could tell the
Yeah,
listeners
sure.
about
Yeah,
that
sure.
story and reconnection.
Well, after I graduated, Liam, I kind of thought coach had held me back. Didn't get to play. When you're 21 years old and you want something more than anything else in the world, and someone controls your access to it and doesn't give it to you, he must not like me very much. If he liked me, give me some, right? Well, that's a 21-year-old. But as time rolled along, and I spent 25 years before I reconnected with Coach, I had gotten into the entertainment business, had had a very successful career, had been fired with 7 shows on television by a very unpleasant, unethical fellow by the name of Leslie Moonves, who I take great pride in the fact that he's one of the people who I think really doesn't like me. That's great. Oh, not everybody should like you. And so I got fired by Leslie, and I had some time to sit and think. And I was out on the golf course one day playing kind of poorly, which was not unusual. And the guy I was with said to me, and it was really weird, Liam, because it felt like Obi-Wan Kenobi was sitting on his shoulder. He said, "Andy, slow down. Get your balance. You're rushing." And it was like John Wooden was right there, Liam, which I must tell you was not a totally comfortable feeling, but sort of like, whoa, this just, are you a golfer?
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me this isn't true. There's every once in a while when you're set up just right, when your grip's just right, when your balance is just there's a stillness that comes over you. It's extraordinary. And it
Yeah.
happened to be right there and then. And I drilled a 2-iron to a foot and a half. Now, coach used to like to interrupt me at this point when I tell the story and say, and he missed the putt, but I didn't. Not true. But in that moment, I realized, wow, this guy had really been coaching me my whole life. That everything I knew about leadership and about the things I cared about, they were all actually things I'd learned from him.
Mm.
And it was the hardest phone call I ever made by a ton. I didn't want to call him. It was like, okay, I had gone into another industry. I had succeeded, Liam. I had put this failure behind me. Now, by the way, the failure that I am describing to you is being one of 14 men in history who've ever been on 3 national championship teams.
Yeah.
But it felt like a failure to me when I was young. Now it blows my mind.
Right.
Are you kidding me? I was a part of the greatest dynasty in the history of sports. I have a big personality. I could have run that train off the tracks, but I didn't. And so when that recognition came that I needed to call coach, it was not a warm and fuzzy recognition. It was a cold and harsh recognition. But I took 24 hours, dialed the phone. It rang a few times. And then, as anybody who makes phone calls for a living knows, that when you are making a call but sort of hoping the person isn't there, I got the greatest relief of all time. The answering machine picked up, and I thought, oh, God, thank you. I'll just leave a little note. Thank you, coach. It's Andy Hill. My life is great. I love you. Thank you. Goodbye. I might not have left my phone number. But what I didn't know was coach would sit there and screen his calls. And I said, "Hi, coach. This is Andy Hill." And he picked the phone up. I mean, he had these fast little hands. I mean, he's a great, great player in his day. And the first thing he said, now one thing about coach that was singular and different, and I had a lot of time with him and I got to observe him a lot. He would speak quickly, right? Be quick, but don't hurry, right? Go quickly. And the first thing he said was, "Where are you?" Kind of like, I go right back to being an idiot, 21 years old. I say, "What do you mean, where am I? Where are you?" And he took a pause. And then the next thing that came across the line was like, a totally different person. I felt like he was speaking to his prodigal son. He said, "I'd really love to see you. When are you going to come see your old coach?" And I went to see him the next day. And we spent about 5 hours together, talking about leadership and life. And I couldn't believe I was sitting there in his den. It was an out of body experience for me. And after about 5 hours, 5 hours in which I realized sort of every idea I thought I had, I'd stolen from him.
Mhm.
Which, by the way, if you know John Wooden, stealing his ideas is the highest compliment you can pay him.
Right.
There's no sense of ownership of these things. And I went downstairs. When you went to visit Coach, he had a call it crappy condo might offend him. It was a crappy condo with no doorman, and he had to go out on his little balcony with his garage opener to let you out of the garage. And the one thing I really picked up from that, Liam, is that every time I left his house, and he had places to go and mail to answer, books to read, he was always on the balcony waving goodbye.
Yeah.
A guy with not a single time-saving advice who had time. And I drove around the corner, and I turned off the car, and I cried for about 10 minutes. I knew my life had changed. Of course, it had changed more than I ever could have imagined. Coach Wooden ended up being one of my truly great friends in the world. And, I miss him. I miss him all the time.
Absolutely. And that's such an amazing story of reconciliation and reconnection. And it's very powerful how you're just standing there over a shot and there's just that one little thing that your playing partner says and it just brings you all the way back.
But Liam, you're a golfer. You can acknowledge that stillness, right? That mental
Absolutely.
stillness. That it's a very unique. If you're not a golfer, you don't understand. But if
No.
you're a golfer, it's like a green flash, man. You can look at sunsets all your life, but when you see one, it's like, wow, this
Yep.
is. And to have that moment tied to a shot, tied to Coach, it was too powerful to ignore.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then you did mention something sort of a couple of minutes ago. You talked about Coach's hands and how good of a player he was. I don't think people understand. He was like the Michael Jordan of his day. He was extremely good, wasn't he?
You described him accurately. He was a Michael Jordan of his day.
Yeah.
Tough as nails, scrappy dude. He'd get in fights. Give you some idea how good he was. The all-time record for free throws made consecutively in competition is held by John Robert Wooden. 138 in a row, playing for Kutsky's Grocers, because it was semi-pro basketball. 138 in a row. Dude could do it. And, in fact, this is an interesting story, Liam. I told you I'd be tangential and you wouldn't have to worry about asking too many questions. One day I was sitting in Coach's little den, the one that's on display in the UCLA Hall of Fame, and we spent hours there. And my vision of Coach, you described him, Michael Jordan of his day, and my vision of Coach was he went to high school and was, for 3 years, sophomore, junior, and senior, the greatest player in the country. That's what I thought.
Yep.
Well, he told me this story about how in the 10th grade, early in the season, he wasn't starting. What? John Wooden isn't starting? How could that be? And at the end of practice, he was, now keep in mind, this is John Wooden telling me this story. I'd never heard it, but I'm sitting there in the den. And he said, I was so mad that I wasn't starting. I stripped down to my jock strap and stormed out of the gym. Now, there's a picture for you, right? I mean, thanks, Coach. TMI, right?
Yeah.
But in that moment, Liam, I recognized something that changed my ability to relate to him, which is I thought the fact that he didn't really connect with the guys who weren't playing once the season started? I thought it was because he didn't care. When he told us that story, I said, Coach, you knew how much it hurt not to play. And took a beat. I said, why didn't you tell us? And when I realized that it hurt him too much, that he was just doing it to protect himself, I felt totally sympathetic towards him. I get it. Who wants to hurt young people in their dreams? That's what the job was. And so he just kind of carved it out. And I will say this, from that day forward, for the rest of my life, every time I talked to John Wooden, the last thing we said to each other was, I love you.
Yeah. That's a really tough place for a coach, well, really any leader to kind of sit behind that concrete wall and try to block it off and keep the emotions back. I guess that's good advice for pretty much anything in life, to, let sort of the feelings out, that sort of thing.
Well, one other point to that, Liam, because I know you're interested in leadership, is that Coach withheld a part of his personality from us until after we graduated. That must have taken great discipline. He's funny. He's one of the funniest guys I ever met. And when we were playing for him, we had no idea. And humor is probably the easiest thing to use to drive a relationship, to get closer, to be funny, is just very appealing. I never knew he was funny, because I think he actually understood that there was a value in having a slight distance from the leader. Looking back on my career, I would say a mistake I made was I actually cared too much that people cared for me. The job of the leader is to be concerned with that, but not let them drive their action.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good place if you can get to not caring if they like you, but caring if they respect you enough to follow your advice,
Exactly.
your leadership. Right. Yeah, I guess sort of going off that, when you're working in the entertainment industry, maybe for CBS, it must have been tough kind of working with people who expected to follow you. You were hoping for your blessing and your tick. Yep, that's a good script. It must have been tough to kind of separate that from wanting to be liked, because reading your book, you talk a lot about firing people and being ruthless. So maybe
don't use that word, ruthless.
Ruthless?
Ruthless. Ruthless is uncaring. Never be ruthless. Always be caring. But you have to protect your organization. Right. You have to hold people accountable. That's absolutely vital. And unfortunately, oftentimes, Liam, what happens is people are so uncomfortable with coaching, teaching, upgrading the level of the people under you so they can succeed, that they wait until they're so doggone angry to give feedback. And you know what? Then they come across as ruthless. Yeah. So, I mean, it's an important distinction to make. Never be ruthless. But, ruthless implies that you fire people and it's like, okay, bring the next one in. I always used to tell people who worked for me, if you can sleep the night before you fire somebody, something's wrong with you. It's a terrible thing to have to do. It is. It's like the worst, but you have to do it. And one of the great examples I got, this was early in my TV career. I was producing a film called Lady Killers for ABC Circle Films. I had talked to the production designer about showing me the plans for the sets. And then I get a call and he says, come over to the stage and take a look at the sets. And I said, well, I thought you were going to show me the plan. He said, oh, you're going to love them. So I went over and looked, and I didn't love them. And I came back to the office. We had an older guy who was Michael Robert Lewis, I think his name was, the director. He must have been in his mid-60s, 10 years younger than I am now. So I thought he was an old guy. And he could tell I didn't like it. And he said, well, what happened? I said, well, I hated the stats. He built them. He never showed me the plans. He said, well, let me ask you a question. He said, if you came in tomorrow morning and you had another production designer working on, working on this, and that guy was gone, how would you feel? I said, well, I'd feel great. He said, well, so go fire him now so you can feel good in the morning. And I did. Good lesson to learn. Don't wait. When you know it's time, get it over with. Move on. But by the way, don't move on until you know you can find another production designer, which, of course, in Hollywood, they're a dime a dozen, so what a big deal.
Well, working in that industry, I mean, I have no knowledge of that industry, anything like that, but it must have been pretty amazing to kind of start working with these, superstars, these amazing people like Chuck Norris. I know it kind of relates to Wooden dealing with Kareem and Walton and dealing with superstars. How did you kind of go about that, and how did Wooden sort of instruct your leadership in dealing with superstars?
Well, I think it was simply everybody's just a person. And you treat everybody with kindness and respect, and it doesn't matter who they are, assuming they deserve your kindness and respect. I think it was one of the things that was singularly different about Coach. I'll tell you another story. We had just beaten Jacksonville, the national championship in Washington, D.C., Cole Fieldhouse. And, it's a big deal when you win the championship. And the alumni, you can hear them in the hallway yelling and screaming and partying. And, we're showering. And I'm like the last guy out. And I look over in the corner, and there's Coach picking up an orange peel. They used to give us oranges at halftime and throwing it in the trash can. Right, we just won the championship, and he's doing janitorial work. And so I'm a wise guy. I go over and say, hey, Coach, there's a janitor. He's going to come in and clean after you do. And he said, well, you just don't understand. He said, I take great pride, Andy, in leaving our locker room cleaner than any team in America. And when I get a letter from a janitor acknowledging that, it makes me feel great. A letter from a janitor made him feel great. He's got thousands of alumni, right? Doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs out there waiting to slam him on the back. And he's taking care of the janitor. Because in his mind, a good janitor was a good janitor, deserved all his respect. And he always treated people like that way, which is one of the reasons why I took dozens of people out to breakfast with Coach at Vips, his favorite little place. And then at the end of breakfast, Coach would always kind of toss out there, would you like to come back to the apartment? And it's like, would I like to come back to the apartment? Are you kidding me? Of course. And I take them back, and, he was in his 90s, so he's slowing down. And after an hour and a half, I'd say, okay, let's let Coach get on with his day. We're going to take off. And I'd walk out the door. Of course, we had to take a little elevator down to the parking garage that he had to let us out of. And most of the time, people started to cry in the elevator. And they started to cry because he saw them. He talked to them. He asked them so many questions. I mean, as you know, you can see from my shirt, my best friend, Bill, he's gone. Yeah. Bill was the same way. Last concert we went to was the Hollywood Bowl, and we were eating before the concert with the drummer from the group that was on before the group we were going to see. And I could just tell this drummer was so excited to sit next to Bill Walton and ask him basketball questions. Never got a question in. When did you start playing the drums? Who's your favorite drummer? What kind of drumstick do you use? I mean, just downloading everything there was to know about this drummer's career. And it was genuine. It was a genuine curiosity and interest in other people. And of course, Coach also had these great blue eyes. And, I'm at times amazed how much we wanted to please him and kind of curious why. But I think those blue eyes were a part of it. I mean, he just kind of hypnotic in his own old dude way.
Yeah, that's funny.
Anybody ever told you look like Rory McIlroy?
No, but I appreciate
Okay,
it.
first person. There you go.
Thanks. um, yeah, that reminds me of a couple of things. I don't know if you know that the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team, they're famous for tidying up the locker room after their away games as well.
Yeah, they're also famous for their haka dance. I
They
love the
are.
haka dance, man.
Yep.
The greatest.
My second episode was on the All Blacks, so you can check that out if you want.
Well, but what a fascinating notion, by the way. The to start with a haka dance and end with something so considerate and caring as cleaning a locker room. It's a beautiful part of the culture that is what ultimately distinguishes great teams. If you listen to anybody from the Eagles yesterday, they talked on and on about culture
Mm-hmm.
and how close everybody was. And when the games are close, closeness matters.
Yep, that's a good way to put it. Well, you talked a little about coach just now. I want to keep going on that thread. What would you say is maybe the biggest misconception people have about coach? Because, like you said earlier, he wasn't necessarily nice to you when you were playing under him, and that could be one. But I'm sure there's some other things.
I think that was probably it. That people thought that he he wasn't tough, that he was a sweet little old man, that he was the guy driving the Pepperidge Farm wagon, like Santa Claus.
Yeah.
He was tough as nails. So I think that was the biggest misconception. And of course, the other misconception is he was successful because Sam Gilbert did his recruiting, which is just the stupidest thing I ever heard. He was winning before anybody ever met Sam Gilbert, and Sam Gilbert never recruited anybody. What he did was, low level nickel and dime, buying a sport coat, paying for a guy's medical procedure that is absolutely a joke. And for idiots like Bob Knight to say that Sam Gilbert is why John Wooden was successful, and that and by the way, which is such an insight into the character of someone like Bob Knight, that John Wooden thought he was better than people. John Wooden didn't think he was better than people. You're ignorant, Bob. You are ignorant.
It's obviously an interesting aspect, but it's nowhere near why you were so successful.
No.
Maybe next we could touch on your friend Bill, and you were only one of maybe 3-ish players to play alongside Kareem or play with Kareem and Bill. You touch on the difference between the two, and
actually one
of one.
Henry Bibby and I were the only scholarship players on the freshman team.
Yep.
Henry went home for Christmas, and I practiced with against Kareem for 2 weeks. So I'm the only one.
Isn't that amazing?
So how do you compare them? First of all, Kareem's the GOAT. I'm a Bruin. Kareem's the GOAT. Let me start there.
Okay.
Just, unbelievable in every facet. I just read Kareem's tribute to Bill on his Substack, and it was absolutely beautiful and had a really interesting insight that was actually, I thought, very sweet. Bill wanted to be Kareem on the basketball court, but Kareem wanted to be Bill off the court. Bill was so comfortable with people. Bill was so gregarious with people. And that's always been so hard for Kareem. So what I would say is pick one guy. Kareem's the greatest. But who's more fun to play with? Bill. Bill made everybody better. You had to work to get Kareem the ball in his spots, right? You had 4 guys out there basically servicing this incredible force in the middle.
Yeah.
With Bill, it was 5-man basketball. Unbelievable passer, unbelievable outlet passer. So, what I would say is they're incomparable. They're the 2 GOATs of college basketball. And, you couldn't make a mistake. To me, they're the most valuable, greatest players in the history of college basketball. And because of the current rules and the way things work, it'll never be matched again. It's a singular thing.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't it amazing that two of the greatest, if not the greatest, college basketball players played within such a short time frame of each other at the same team?
The greatest.
The greatest.
The greatest. No qualification. The greatest. And I saw every game Kareem played. I started going to I went to every game in Pauley Pavilion from 1965 on.
Yeah.
From Kareem's first game where the freshman team beat the defending national champion. And the greatest. They changed the rule. They took the dunk away, which, by the way, only made him better.
Very much so. Skyhook.
Yep.
Actually, after that Jacksonville game, the championship you won, I remember reading Sidney Wicks said something along the lines of, thanks to Kareem, we won because if, I think it was Gilmore was the player he was up against, if he could dunk, he would have killed me.
Well, that doesn't sound like Sidney. But I think it may be true. Our artist is an enormous man. I mean, absolutely enormous. But I can tell you, if you go back and look at those blocks against artists that Sidney made,
yeah,
I think only one of them was a goaltend. Sidney got up so fast. And I'll tell you a funny story. Years ago, artists came to my house for a dinner that Rod Carew actually had won in a bid at a pediatric cancer event. And so Rod's manager, Frank Pace, put together a group of Jacksonville guys and brought them to the house. So here's Coach Wooden with Artis Gilmore. And Artis is whining to Coach that Sidney blocked those shots, but he goaltended them. Coach, what people don't realize, this is another thing about Coach. You say, what isn't known about Coach? Indiana guys are the greatest trash talkers, including John Wooden. So John Wooden lets the Artis go on for a bit, and then he says, Artis, how tall are you? And, Artis says, I'm 7'2". And Coach says, you should be ashamed of yourself. I laughed so hard I fell off the couch. You should be ashamed of yourself. Let Sidney block your shot like that.
Yeah.
Classic.
Great. That's great. It's like a 6-inch difference right there. That's
yes,
crazy.
Absolutely. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Well, as you've already mentioned, one of Coach's maybe most important attributes they look for was quickness. Be quick, but don't hurry. I feel like there's sort of a parallel we can draw there with like the best military commanders like Napoleon, Alexander the Great. They were known for marching their armies just so quickly. Can you talk a little bit about why quickness was so important to Coach and maybe how you sort of saw that parallel later on when you were leading at CBS?
Well, I think that he understood a few things that I think everybody can agree with. First of all, you ever met anybody who wants to play on a slowdown team? No, you haven't. They don't exist. Everybody wants to get out and go. So if you understand that there are different ways to play the game, but that it's more entertaining when it's played at pace, and you need players to win, let's play fast. That's a start. But the idea of having more quick players in the game than the other team at any given time. And by the way, he also loved always having a left-handed guy in the team too. Once again, he had a very strong sense of having balance out there. He had very diverse teams.
Yep.
Kids from the big cities, kids from the small cities, there's kids from the South, local kids. This was not in any way, shape, or form a homogeneous group. But the idea that we're going to play fast, we're going to stay after them. And by the way, when we get up 10, we're not going to slow down. We're going to go up 20. We're going to stay at them. My last year at UCLA, that Bill Walton team that went 30-0 and still holds the all-time NCAA record, the margin of victory was like 31 points a game.
Yeah.
A game. That's insane. But there was never any sense of, okay, we've got a lead, let's protect it. Let's get after it. Let's stay after it. And it develops a mental mindset for the other team too, where it wasn't unusual for at some point them they just crack. We played up at Oregon State against a good Oregon State team, Ralph Miller, Hall of Fame coach, and they had a guy named Freddie Boyd, had a really nice career in the NBA, and he was killing us. And, they got the ball, they got the lead, 40 seconds to go. He dribbles it off his foot like a kid in the third grade. How does that happen? They're playing Louisville in the finals. Louisville can ice the game. The guy at the line, Terry Howard, 28 for 28 for the year. Frick! How does it happen? I don't. But I think part of it was just a response to the relentless mindset of we're coming after you. And by the way, keeping in mind, we didn't have 8 defenses. We didn't have 14 out of bounds plays. We played man-to-man defense. That's what we did. And by the way, we never looked at film, ever. And almost never talked about the other team. 2 or 3 times a year, when we were playing a team ranked in the top 10, and only then, he would give the second team time to learn the other team's offense, and we would actually scrimmage using the other team's offense, like 2 times a year. Other than that, you barely knew who the other team was. But the focus was on us and mastering the fundamentals of the game. And then I'll tell you one other great story that blew my mind. Look, I went to see Coach twice when I graduated from college.
Yep.
25 years, and then we reconnected. Well, one of the times I went to see him, I had invented a statistic that is now today called the plus minus. I invented it in 1976. And I wrote an article. But before submitting the article, I thought I should go see if this is kind of out there because it's so obvious. And the only way to find out was to go see Coach because there was no internet. And I took it down to him, and he absolutely loved it. But the only other time I went to see him, and by the way, it was published in Scholastic Coach, so every high school coach in America saw it. So when people say, how can you say you invented it? Well, I'm sure somebody thought of it, but, they didn't tell anybody else. I mean, I'd have had a light bulb in your living room, but Edison got him out there. And my other time that I went to see Coach, I was taking a learning theory class. Now, my junior year was Sidney, Curtis, Steve Patterson. We played scratchy for 38 minutes, 38 minutes. And then those last 3 minutes, we would just grind people to dust. It was amazing, just amazing. Well, I took a learning theory class in Moore Hall. I was getting a graduate degree. And in the learning theory class, the professor said, we're going to study frustration tolerance today. How do you get people to keep doing something and it didn't work? Right? Well, that was a pretty good description of how we had won all of these games was as the game comes down to the stretch, are you going to keep doing what you do or are you going to panic and go too fast? And so this is an interesting question. I'll give you a second to think about it, Liam. What reinforcement schedule would you give a pigeon? Okay, you got a shock, you got a seed, right? How do you get that pigeon to peck a bar once you've removed the shocks and the seeds, right? Frustration tolerant. So I sit in this class and the professor answers that question, which is positive and negative reinforcement randomly distributed and gradually taken away over time. And I went, oh my God, that's exactly John Wooden's teaching paradigm. I said, I got to go down. I got to go tell him. It's unbelievable. And I went down and I told him this and he kind of went, oh yeah. Kind of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a savant element to Coach, and I don't mean it in a negative sense at all. He was not only an incredibly smart guy, but he had incredibly good instincts about things like this.
Yeah. So you mean like he would give very little positive feedback and compliments to players? Is that what you're kind of getting? Yeah.
As the year went along, yeah, yes. On a when you thought about it after the fact, when I'm sitting there in the learning theory class, I'm going, yeah, it was kind of just sort of slowly withdrawn.
Hmm.
And in fact, all of the latest learning theory totally, totally support Coach Wooden's learning theory.
Yeah. Isn't that great how they line up?
Yep.
Might as well just read all the books written about him and just write
Not a
the
bad
theory.
Well, by the way, because I know you're interested in leadership. I mean, what I would say is, uh, first of all, organizations have lots of leaders. If you think it's only the person at the top of the organization, you don't understand leadership. Leadership, hopefully, in a healthy organization, is at multiple levels in the organization, and strong organizations don't just have one leader at the top. It doesn't work that way. You got to all kind of have this same shared goal and a desire to get there with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, winning by yourself is different than winning with a team. I mean, and I was unbelievably lucky to get to be part of a team that won more than any other team ever. And the one thing I would like to share with the folks who listen to this is winning all the time is not all it's cracked up to be. It becomes an expectation. And, watching the Chiefs fall short, it's just the expectation is a burden. I actually had a guy call me up to interview. He's writing an article for the NCAA tournament program. And he said, I wanted to talk to you about three-peats. I said, what can I tell you about three-peats? When I got there, we won 4, 5, and 6. I don't know from three-peats. but it does take some of the joy out of it when the expectation is so high.
Yeah. That was an interesting aspect I picked up on, how it almost became like a bore or a chore.
Like a chore, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we could touch a little on those 3 losses that you had. I know you guys had like sort of team player meetings after those losses. What were those losses like? What did they teach you?
Well, here a couple things. First of all, Coach put the scrubs in at the end of I call me a scrub.
Yeah.
At the end of every one of those games. Now, there's a party. Keep in mind, there was no Joe Lunardi. You know Joe Lunardi is? He's the rankings guy.
Okay.
Right. Joe Lunardi is the reason why the young men and women who work hard all year long on the practice team never get into the game anymore, because you've got to win by 27, not 22.
Yeah.
And that just sucks. I mean, these people deserve a chance to get into the game, but it's all about crushing the other team. And, that just wasn't part of our sensibility.
Yeah.
It was talk about old fashioned. The idea was, honestly, if you knock the guy down, you pick him up. Now if you do it, they get mad, they yell at you. Leave him alone, don't touch him.
So you had those player-led meetings after every loss.
Oh yes, I kind of lost that thread, didn't I? Yeah. Here's what was interesting to me is he put the scrubs in. Now, what was that about? That was about being in a locker room with not a single person looking out the window going, this ain't about me. Because one thing he understood is if he put me in and we were 8 points down with a minute and a half to go, I thought we should still win the game. Give me the ball. Come on, let's go. Right? I'm crazy. I'm an athlete. So he put us all into every one of those games, which I find very strange in hindsight.
It is a little.
But I also felt in the locker room after all 3 of those losses against Oregon, USC, and Notre Dame that and he hated to lose. Coach hated to lose. He never talked about it. He hated to lose, competitive as can be. But by the time he got to the locker room, he knew how this was going to work for him. It was okay. You guys need to be taken down a peg. At the end of the day, it's about detail. I don't know. Once again, listen to the Eagles talking about detail. The word they bring up a lot, detail.
Mm-hmm.
And, details are what wins games, taking care of the little thing. And by the way, details about cleaning your locker afterward, just like the All Blacks, just like Coach Wooden. I mean, you conduct yourself as a champion if you want to be a champion. Don't wait till you get there.
Yeah.
And so after those games, I'm not going to say he was happy, but he seemed really okay with it. And it really, listen, you got a lot of egos. It was very important for guys to get together and kind of let their hair down. And I don't think any of those losses hurt us. I think they all helped us.
Isn't that such the cliche line that the failures are teaching? They're not failures. They teach you things. They're like just as important as successes sometimes. And it's good that those losses didn't happen in championship games when you were there. Although, of course, they lost the semifinal after you left. All right. Perhaps there's a question I kind of want to ask you about failure. Those are obviously 3 failures. Do you have another favorite failure or anything like that sort of taught you something?
I'll give you a great failure story. It's not about me. It's about my son.
All right, let's do it.
My son, who really has taken all of Coach Wooden's lessons. My son is an oboe professor. He's a John Wooden oboe professor at the University of Nevada, Reno. And earlier in his career, he went up for a job at a Big Ten school. And, the Big Ten has great music departments. So there are 80 oboists who show up for this thing, and Aaron comes in second. Hey, great, second out of 80. Well, thanks a lot. Right? A lot of work, had to fly there, give a lesson, give a performance, do all this stuff, come in second. Why? Oh, yes. He said, what fell short? And they said to him, well, we felt you didn't have a strong enough digital presence. Now, that's an interesting comment. This was like 15 years ago. You didn't have a strong enough digital presence. Now, instead of being unbelievably distraught, incredibly emotional, and totally depressed because he didn't get the job, he thought about it, and he took on a project. Now, in oboe, there are 2 etude books, Barrett and Fairley. I don't know if you ever played a musical instrument, Liam, but, this is typical for a musical instrument. There are etude books where you do these studies to get better. And the most popular one, 60% of the students learn on a thing called Barrett, and about 40% of them learn in a book called Fairley. Well, there are 48 etudes. Aaron took a year, recorded every one of them. So when he goes to the International Double Reed Society, he's like a rock star. Every young person there knows Aaron Hill, everyone. And he's now the head of the faculty senate at the University of Nevada, Reno. Wow. But he took the bad news and turned it into something. And by the way, keep in mind, this is a perennial. It'll be up on YouTube as long as he's alive. It took him a year. Nobody else is going to jump in and do an updated version. What a solution to a loss. Not, oh my God, I think I should have won. But wow, what can I do to keep this from happening again? And so, yes, in those losses, you do have that opportunity to say, where did I go wrong? What do I need to do better? And by the way, all too often, what people do is they say, well, who can I blame? Which is a complete waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a total waste of time. Blame the refs. They may be bad, but do you really think that these people who devote their lives to being referees want one of the 2 teams to win? I don't believe it. And by the way, they make terrible calls all the time, but it's because they're incompetent, not because they're rooting for somebody.
Well, actually, speaking of refs, didn't Coach used to absolutely berate them? Wasn't that he would say he wouldn't really call?
No, he would not berate them. He would needle them. He would needle them constantly. And yes, He would needle away, and
Yeah.
he had this little program that he talked through, so you couldn't really see that he was talking. Oh yeah, he would needle him away. In fact, one of his great stories was he had this one referee. He said he was absolutely the worst referee he had ever seen. Right, this guy has just made a terrible call against UCLA, and coach stands up and says, "That's a terrible call." And the referee looks at him and he says, "You know, coach, they liked it at the other end."
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I know we're kind of coming up on time a little. We've gone a little over. I hope you don't mind about that.
Not at all, Liam. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I wish you all the best of luck. I think the idea of looking into what creates great teams is a really important thing to do. And I think, even in this one little thing where we've just sort of talked around it, the biggest insight I got was just that after the Haka dance, the black shirts cleaned the locker room after the game. I mean, once again, that to me is you can be both a warrior and a compassionate person. They're not separate. John Wooden was a warrior. He was a tough guy, but he was also a beautiful person. We can
Yeah.
be both, not one or the other.
Is there anything else that you want to touch on? Any recommendations or requests or things we've missed?
I'll give you a recommendation. Coach Wooden got his philosophy from a pamphlet written in 1890. And if you want to give yourself a treat, get it on Amazon for $5. It's called The Majesty of Calmness. 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 The Majesty of Calmness by William George Jordan. If you want a real schematic of where Coach put his philosophy together, read The Majesty of Calmness.
Well, thank you so much once again for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Liam. Have fun, buddy.
All right, take care. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Incredible Teams. As always, love to hear your feedback and thoughts, so please comment or message me. Subscribe if you like what you heard, and hope to see you on the next episode. Thanks.